I remember the exact moment my wife, Sophie, decided to end our marriage. She was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone as if she hadn't a care in the world. I'd just walked in, dropping my satchel by the door, ready to unwind from a long day at the office. She looked up, her expression unreadable. "Liam," she said, her voice casual, "I want a divorce." There was no warning, no attempt to soften the blow. The words were delivered with the same detached coolness one might use to comment on the weather. I froze, unsure if I'd heard her correctly. "What did you just say?" A storm was raging inside me, but my voice remained steady, betraying none of it. "I said, I want a divorce," she repeated, her tone laced with impatience, as if I were a simpleton who hadn't understood her the first time. Should I have been furious, devastated? Instead, I was struck dumb by the sheer audacity of it all. A divorce, after everything we'd been through. But it was her reason that cut the deepest. She folded her arms, her posture defensive. "I can't live like this anymore. I want to be with someone who actually works, who contributes something. This isn't the life I signed up for." I blinked. "Doesn't work?" I almost laughed, but I managed to keep my expression neutral. For years, I had built my career from the ground up. I was earning well over £300,000 a year, securing a future most people could only dream of. But Sophie had never once asked about my work. She'd never shown the slightest interest in how I made my money. In her mind, I was just coasting, barely scraping by. I leaned against the kitchen counter, studying her. She was so sure of herself, so convinced she was making the right decision. "All right," I said simply, putting down my bag. She tilted her head, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "All right? Yes, Sophie. If you want a divorce, I won't stand in your way." For a fleeting moment, I saw a flash of uncertainty cross her face, but it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the smug, self-assured smile I had grown so accustomed to. "Good. I've already spoken to a solicitor. I want you out of this house by the end of the month. Out of my house." The nerve was almost comical, but I didn't argue. If she didn't want me, I would leave. "Fine," I replied, and headed upstairs. I could feel her eyes on my back, waiting for me to explode, to beg, to fight. I gave her nothing. In the privacy of our bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and let the reality of the situation sink in. This wasn't just about a divorce. This was a power play. Sophie wanted control, and she wanted to paint me as the failure in our relationship. Perhaps she thought I would fight for her, plead for another chance. But she didn't know me as well as she thought. The next few days were a masterclass in passive aggression. Suddenly, Sophie had an opinion on everything from the way I folded the laundry to how I spent my evenings. She criticized my hobbies, my habits, even the way I made my coffee. It was as if she was trying to build a case against me, to justify her decision by turning me into the villain. And then there was Ethan, my so-called best friend. At first, I didn't think much of how often she mentioned his name. "Ethan says," or "Ethan recommended." But it soon became clear that he was more than just a friend in her eyes. I didn't confront her. I wasn't ready to show my hand just yet. Instead, I let her believe she was in complete control. I let her think I was the passive, oblivious husband, too wrapped up in my own world to notice what was happening right under my nose. One evening, as I was packing a few essentials into a suitcase, Sophie leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a smirk on her face. "So, have you figured out where you're going to live?" Her voice dripped with contempt, I zipped up the bag and faced her. "Don't worry about me, Sophie. I'll be just fine." She scoffed, clearly annoyed by my composure. "You'd better be. Ethan and I are having a housewarming party next weekend. It would be a bit awkward if you were still hanging around." A housewarming party? In my house? With my best friend? The boldness was almost admirable. "Don't worry," I said, slinging the bag over my shoulder. "I'll be long gone before then." As I walked past her, I caught a glimpse of her triumphant smile. She thought she'd won. She thought I was slinking away in defeat. But what Sophie didn't realize was that she had just handed me the match to light the fuse. If she wanted to burn everything to the ground, I was more than happy to let her. And I would watch as the flames consumed them both. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't shouting or fighting. It's silence. It's patience. It's quietly preparing to bury your opponents while they dig their own graves. And believe me, I was just getting started. Betrayal is a subtle thing. It doesn't announce its arrival with fanfare and fireworks. No, it creeps in quietly, disguised in casual conversations and innocent gestures. Then one day, you wake up and realize that everything you believed to be solid has been slowly eroding beneath your feet. Sophie's demand for a divorce was the first crack. What followed was the steady dismantling of everything I thought I knew about her and Ethan. Yes, Ethan, my best friend, or at least, the man who had held that title for years. I should have seen it sooner, but hindsight is a cruel companion. It started subtly. Sophie began to mention Ethan's name more than usual. "Ethan says," or "Ethan recommended," she would drop casually over dinner. I'd nod, thinking nothing of it. He was a close friend to both of us after all, but as the weeks went on, his name seeped into our conversations with more frequency and with a certain warmth that made my stomach turn. The first real red flag came one Saturday afternoon. Sophie had just returned from a lunch meeting with Ethan. She was glowing, her cheeks flushed in a way I hadn't seen in years. When I asked what was so funny, she waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, just something Ethan said. You wouldn't get it." I wouldn't get it? When had I become an outsider looking in on my own marriage? The answer, I realized, was much earlier than I cared to admit. I started noticing more. The sly smiles as she texted, quickly locking her phone. The way she suddenly started dressing up whenever she had plans with Ethan. The excuses. They were just friends. I was being too sensitive. Sensitive. The favorite word of every guilty person looking to deflect blame. Still, I didn't confront her. What was the point? She would deny it, twist the narrative to make me seem like the paranoid husband who couldn't handle his wife having male friends. So I let her think I was blind, that I was too absorbed in my own life to notice hers falling apart. The final nail in the coffin came when Ethan showed up at my house unannounced. I was in the process of packing my life into boxes, as Sophie had so kindly requested, when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Ethan, his usual confident smirk plastered across his face. He didn't wait for an invitation, just strode inside. "Liam, mate," he said, as if we were still the best of friends. "How are you holding up?" I stared at him, every ounce of my patience stretched to its limit. "What do you want, Ethan?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. He leaned against a wall, trying to look casual and charming. "Just came to see how you were doing. Sophie told me you were moving out, thought you might need a hand. A hand from the man who was, quite literally, moving into my life." The audacity was breathtaking. "I can manage," I replied curtly, turning back to my boxes. Ethan lingered, and I could practically see the wheels turning in his head. He wasn't just here to check on me. He was here to gloat, to mark his territory. "Look, I know this must be tough for you," he said, in a tone he probably thought sounded sincere. "But hey, these things happen. Life's unpredictable." "These things happen," I repeated, turning to face him fully. I took a slow step closer, forcing him to meet my gaze. "Yes, Ethan, they do. And sometimes what goes around comes around." For the first time, he faltered. The confident smile flickered, replaced by something that looked a lot like uncertainty. I didn't wait for him to recover, just turned back to my suitcase, effectively dismissing him. "You were always the cool one, Liam," he said, backing awkwardly towards the door. "No hard feelings, eh?" I didn't answer. Silence is a powerful thing, especially when someone is desperate for a reaction. Ethan left without another word, and as his car disappeared down the street, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. That night, lying in the bed that would soon no longer be mine, I replayed the events of the past few months. The missed signs, the lies, the betrayal. I could have been angry, could have confronted them both, and demanded answers. But what would that have accomplished? They had already written me off as irrelevant, a footnote in their story. But what they didn't realize was that I wasn't the passive, oblivious husband they thought I was. I had been paying attention, I had been keeping score, and I was carefully planning my next move. If Sophie and Ethan thought they could just walk off into the sunset together, scotangent-free, they were in for a rude awakening, because a betrayal doesn't end when the truth comes out. No, that's when the real game begins. And as far as I was concerned, this was a game I was fully prepared to win. Divorce. It's such a small word for such a complicated story. It implies finality, a simple end to a complex narrative. But as Sophie and I walked into the solicitor's mediation room, I realized that for her, this wasn't an ending. It was a victory lap, a celebration of what she considered her upgrade. She showed up in a tailored dress, radiating an aura of smug confidence that turned my stomach. And not far behind her, lurking like a shadow, was Ethan. He didn't come into the room, of course. He wouldn't dare. But his presence there told me everything I needed to know. Sophie wasn't just divorcing me. She was parading her betrayal like a badge of honor. "Liam, let's not drag this out," she said as we sat across the table from each other. "I don't want this to be any harder than it needs to be." Harder than it needs to be. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had already made everything hard, trampling over years of marriage like a worn-out rug she couldn't wait to replace. "Neither do I replied calmly, meeting her gaze without flinching. Her solicitor laid out her terms. She wanted the house, the car, a selection of the furniture, and what she assumed was a significant portion of my meager savings. She probably expected me to fight, to haggle, maybe even to beg for better terms. But I didn't budge. I agreed to every single condition, signing each document without hesitation. Sophie blinked at me, confused. "You're okay with all this?" "Why wouldn't I be?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "It's just stuff, Sophie. You can have it." For a moment, I saw a flicker of doubt in her expression, but she quickly masked it with her customary smirk. She thought she had won, that she was walking away with everything that mattered. What she didn't know was that the house was never mine to begin with. It was a rental property, a place I'd used as a workspace when I first started freelancing years ago. And the savings she thought she was getting a chunk of? A mere fraction of my assets. The real money was tucked away in investment portfolios she didn't even know existed. As the last papers were signed and the proceedings were finalized, Sophie leaned back in her chair, satisfied. "Well, I'm glad we could handle this like adults," she said with a condescending air. I just nodded, hiding a smile. A week later, I packed the last of my personal belongings and left the house she had so desperately wanted. I left everything she'd asked for. The furniture, the decor, even the expensive kitchen appliances she'd never once properly used. None of it was worth taking. Let her have her spoils. Ethan, of course, moved in without delay. A neighbor texted me a picture of him carrying boxes inside. Sophie standing on the doorstep, with that same smug smile on her face. They probably thought they were building their perfect little life together, completely unaware of the storm gathering just over the horizon. What Sophie didn't know was that I had started gathering evidence of her and Ethan's affair long before the divorce. Photos, text messages, even GPS records showing their frequent lunch dates at a nearby hotel. I could have used it to blow up the divorce proceedings, but I chose not to. Why? Because dragging it out in court would have just prolonged the drama, and I wanted something far more satisfying. I wanted karma to run its course, and I wanted a front row seat when it did. In the weeks that followed, I settled into my new life. My career continued to flourish, my income growing as new opportunities poured in. Sophie and Ethan, meanwhile, were busy parading their relationship around town as if they were the epitome of happiness. I didn't react. I didn't call. I didn't text. My silence was deafening, and I knew it would eventually start to eat at them. One day, I got a message from a mutual friend. "Liam, did you know Sophie's having a housewarming party? Her and Ethan are really going for it." I chuckled to myself. Of course they were. Sophie was the type of person who needed the approval of others, who thrived on the illusion of success. She didn't realize her shiny new life was built on a foundation of lies, and that foundation was already starting to crack. That evening, as I sat in my new apartment, looking out over the city lights, I couldn't help but feel a sense of calm. Sophie thought she had won, but she had no idea what she had truly lost. And Ethan was about to learn that there was a price to pay for coveting what wasn't his. I was in no hurry. After all, revenge is a dish best served cold, and I was just getting started. I'm not sure what Sophie expected when she and Ethan decided to make their affair official. Perhaps she envisioned a picture-perfect life filled with weekend brunches, romantic getaways, and the glow of a new relationship. If so, she was destined for a harsh reality check. It didn't take long for the cracks to appear. I, of course, kept my distance. There was no need for me to intervene. They were doing a perfectly good job of digging their own graves without my help. The first signs of trouble came through whispers from mutual acquaintances. A friend of mine mentioned that Sophie and Ethan were already struggling to maintain their new dream life. She'd been trying to show off by hosting all these dinner parties, but apparently, Ethan's spending had gotten so out of control that they were behind on their bills. I wasn't surprised. Ethan had always been the type of man who wanted the lifestyle without the work ethic. He loved the expensive suits, the flashy car, and the fine dining. But he had neither the discipline nor the income to sustain it. Sophie, it seemed, hadn't realized she'd traded financial stability for a man who was all style and no substance. Then there were the rumors about their arguments. They weren't the happy couple everyone thought they were. People talked about the shouting matches that could be heard through the walls of their rented house. Yes, rented. The house that Sophie had been so smug about winning in the divorce was gone. She'd had to give it up after realizing she couldn't possibly afford the upkeep. One day, I got a call from an old neighbor. "Liam, you're not going to believe this," she said. barely containing her laughter. The landlord was knocking on Sophie and Ethan's door this morning, causing a real scene. Apparently, their rent is overdue. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. Oh, really? By how much? 3 months, she said. They're trying to act like it's no big deal, but you can tell they're struggling. It was poetic justice. The life they had so proudly built on a foundation of betrayal was crumbling under the weight of their own arrogance. I, meanwhile, focused on my own life. My income had grown exponentially since the divorce, and I was busier than ever with new projects and opportunities. I poured myself into building something real and sustainable, while Sophie and Ethan flailed in the shallows of their empty relationship. Then, out of the blue, I heard from Sophie. She sent a casual text one evening. "Hey Liam, hope you're well. Just thought I'd check in and see how you are." I stared at the message for a moment, debating whether to reply. I could sense the desperation hidden beneath her words. She wasn't checking in, she was fishing. Still, I decided to play along. "I'm doing great, Sophie. Business is booming. How are things with you?" Her reply came quickly. "Oh, you know, Ethan and I are good. Things are a bit tight financially, but we're managing." Managing. I almost laughed. That was a generous way of putting it. The real bombshell came a week later. I was leaving a client meeting when I saw Sophie waiting outside the building. She looked different, tired, stressed, and not nearly as put together as she used to be. "Liam," she said, her voice laced with something I hadn't heard from her in years. Uncertainty. I kept my expression neutral as I approached her. "Sophie, what are you doing here?" She hesitated, fiddling with the strap of her handbag. I wanted to talk. Things have been really difficult lately, and I was hoping maybe we could meet up, just to chat." Meet up to chat. I knew exactly what she wanted, but I wasn't going to make it easy for her. "I'm pretty busy," I said. "But I hope things get better for you." She forced a smile, but I could see the cracks beneath the surface. As I walked away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. This was karma in its purest form. Sophie and Ethan thought they were trading up for something better, but they hadn't realized the cost of their choices. Now they were trapped in a life they couldn't afford, struggling to maintain a facade while the walls closed in around them. And the best part? I hadn't had to lift a finger. They had done all of this to themselves, and I was content to watch from a distance as they reaped what they had sown. Their perfect little world was falling to pieces, and I hadn't even started my revenge yet. The funny thing about revenge is that it doesn't always have to be loud. Sometimes, the sweetest victories are the ones where you don't have to say a word. You just let the truth speak for itself and allow the consequences to do the talking. That's what I did. I watched as the fantasy life Sophie and Ethan had so carefully constructed began to crumble. And while they were busy trying to maintain the facade, I was thriving. My work took off in ways I never could have anticipated. Contracts were rolling in, and my annual income soared past £400,000. I wasn't just doing well, I was flying. But I kept quiet. There was no need to broadcast my success. Sophie had already written me off as a man who didn't work, and I was more than happy to let her keep that misconception. Why correct her when her ignorance was working so perfectly in my favor? Instead of focusing on them, I turned all my attention inward. I upgraded my apartment to a sleek, modern space in the heart of the city, a place that reflected my new life. Floor-to-ceiling windows, smart technology, and a breathtaking view of the skyline. It was a home built by my own efforts, free from the bitterness and betrayal that had tainted the last one. My days were filled with meetings, projects, and opportunities that kept me sharp and engaged. The nights were for me. I started going out more, reconnecting with old friends and making new ones. Life felt lighter, freer, and full of potential. Of course, Sophie wasn't entirely gone. Every now and then I'd get a text or hear through mutual friends about her and Ethan's latest struggles. The overdue bills, the arguments, the mounting debt. I heard they had tried to host a dinner party at their rented flat, only to have the electricity cut off midway through because they hadn't paid the bill. "Liam, you should have seen it," one friend told me over the phone, laughing. Sophie was mortified. Ethan tried to play it off like it was a mistake, but everyone knew the real reason. I didn't laugh. I just nodded, letting a quiet sense of satisfaction wash over me. This wasn't about gloating or reveling in their failures. It was about balance. They had tipped the scales with their betrayal, and now life was balancing them back out. One day, I ran into Ethan at a coffee shop. He looked haggard, his once polished appearance replaced by something more disheveled. He didn't see me at first, which gave me a moment to observe him. He was hunched over his laptop, brow furrowed as he scrolled through what looked like a job-seeking website. When he finally looked up and saw me, his expression changed. There was no arrogance, no bravado, just a faint glint of embarrassment. "Liam," he said, standing up awkwardly. "Ethan," I replied coolly. "How are things?" He hesitated, his eyes darting around as if looking for an escape. "Good, you know. Busy with work, keeping my head down. Work." "Good for you," I said, raising an eyebrow. He laughed nervously, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, keeping busy. You know how it is." I just nodded, letting the silence stretch between us. He shifted uncomfortably, then muttered something about having to go and hurried out. The encounter told me everything I needed to know. Ethan was struggling, and Sophie's perfect new life wasn't as perfect as she'd hoped. As the weeks passed, Sophie's messages became more frequent. At first, they were vague, just a checking in, or a hope you're well. But I knew what they really meant. She was testing the waters, trying to gauge whether I'd be willing to help her. I ignored most of them. The few I did reply to were short and polite, giving her nothing to hold on to. It didn't take long for her messages to become more direct. "Liam, I know we had our issues, but I could really use a friend right now." A friend. The irony was rich. She had discarded me like yesterday's newspaper, but now that her shiny new life was falling apart, she wanted a lifeline. I didn't reply, not out of spite, but because I owed her nothing. Sophie had made her choices, and now she was living with them. My silence spoke volumes. While she and Ethan were struggling to keep their heads above water, I was soaring. Opportunities kept coming, my investments flourished, and my life was filled with peace and purpose. I didn't need to confront Sophie or Ethan. I didn't need to shout or accuse or demand an apology. My success, my happiness, that was my revenge. And the best part was, they knew it. They saw it in every ignored message, in every passing rumor of my success, and in every encounter where they were scrambling to pick up the broken pieces while I walked away with my head held high. This wasn't just about getting even. It was about proving to myself that I could rise above it all. And I had. Quietly, confidently, and completely. The downfall of Sophie and Ethan wasn't an explosion. It was a slow, squalid collapse of their own making. I watched from a distance as the process unfolded, catching bits and pieces from mutual acquaintances and the occasional social media post. Each new update painted a clearer picture. They were drowning in their own arrogance, and the water was rising fast. At first, Sophie had tried to keep up appearances. She kept posting photos of lavish dinners with Ethan, holidays that looked far grander than they were, and snapshots of their perfect life. But the cracks were beginning to show. The dinners became less frequent, the holidays disappeared, and the smiles in their photos started to look forced. Then the whispers began. People started noticing that Sophie wasn't as put together as she used to be. Her once perfect hair and designer clothes were being replaced by cheaper alternatives. Ethan, the ever-dapper peacock, was now re-wearing outfits. It wasn't long before the whispers turned into direct reports. A mutual friend called me one day with news. "Liam, you're going to love this," she said, barely suppressing her glee. "Sophie and Ethan are in serious trouble. I heard they're months behind on their rent." I raised an eyebrow, surprised, but not shocked. The rent? I thought they owned that place. "Not a chance," she said. "They've been renting the whole time. The rumor is they're about to be evicted." I let out a small chuckle. It was poetic justice. Sophie had fought so hard to get that house in the divorce, only to find she couldn't afford to keep it. The financial troubles didn't stop there. Another friend mentioned that Ethan had been laid off from his job. He was still pretending he had everything under control, but it was clear he was scrambling. And Sophie, who had complained so loudly about me not working, had never held a proper job herself. Now, faced with mounting bills and no income, their perfect life was imploding. One evening, as I was sipping coffee and scrolling through emails, a text came through from Sophie. "Liam, I really need to talk to you. It's important." I stared at the message for a moment before typing a reply. "What's wrong?" Her response was almost immediate. "It's not good. Ethan and I are going through a rough patch. I was wondering if maybe you could help us out? Just a small loan to get us through this?" A loan. From me. I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. She had left me, mocked me, and flaunted her new relationship with Ethan, and now she wanted my help. "That's a shame," I typed back. "But I'm afraid I can't help you. I'm sure you two will figure it out." This time, her reply was slower, and I could almost feel her frustration through the screen. "Liam, please. Just this once. There's no need to make a big deal out of this." I didn't reply again. There was nothing more to say. Sophie and Ethan had made their bed, and now they were lying in it. The next update came a week later. Sophie and Ethan had been officially evicted. The landlord, tired of their excuses, had given them a hard deadline, and they had failed to meet it. They had to move into a small, run-down flat on the outskirts of the city. "Liam, you should see it," the same mutual friend told me over the phone. "It's a world away from the life they were pretending to have. Sophie is a mess, and Ethan looks like he's aged 10 years. I didn't gloat. I didn't have to. Their downfall wasn't about me. It was about the consequences of their own choices. Sophie had traded a life of stability and support for a fantasy that couldn't stand up to reality. And Ethan, well, he was getting exactly what he deserved. But the most telling sign came from another unexpected encounter. I ran into Sophie at the supermarket. Her trolley was filled with value brand products. She looked up, saw me, and froze. "Liam?" she said, her voice trembling. "Sophie," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. She just looked defeated. The confident, arrogant woman who had demanded a divorce and paraded her affair was gone. "I hope you're doing all right," I said, breaking the silence. She gave a quick nod, avoiding my gaze. You too, she mumbled, before pushing her trolley and disappearing down the aisle. As I watched her go, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. Satisfaction, yes, but also a kind of pity. Sophie had made her choices, and they had led her here. This was the life she had fought so hard to create, and now she was trapped in it. I didn't have to say or do anything to make her regret what she'd done. Life had already done that for me, and as I walked out of the store that day, I realized that sometimes karma doesn't need any help. It just needs time. It didn't take long for everything to come to a head. I knew it was coming. It was inevitable. People like Sophie and Ethan don't handle consequences well. When the fantasy of success they've so carefully constructed starts to fall apart, they lash out, looking for someone to blame or someone to bail them out. One morning, just as I was finishing a call with a client, my phone rang with an unrecognized number. I knew, though, it was Sophie. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. I answered, keeping my tone professional. Liam speaking. Her voice was strained, on the verge of breaking. Liam, we need to talk. I leaned back in my chair, sighing. About what, Sophie? There was a pause, as if she was trying to find the right words. About everything. About Ethan. About us. I raised an eyebrow, though she couldn't see it. Us. The audacity. There is no us, Sophie. That ended the day you served me divorce papers. What do you really want? She hesitated again, her voice dropping lower. We're struggling, Liam. It hasn't been easy, after everything. I just thought maybe we could talk. Maybe you could help. Help! There it was. The real reason for the call. Help with what? I asked, playing dumb. Financially, she admitted, her tone thick with forced humility. Just a loan, to get us back on our feet. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Sophie, you left me because you thought I was inadequate, that I didn't work hard enough or earn enough money. And now you want me to clean up the mess you've made? Her voice sharpened, a defensive edge creeping in. You don't understand. Ethan and I are just going through a rough patch. A rough patch? I cut her off. Sophie, you made your choice. You left me for Ethan because you thought he was the better option. Now you want me to foot the bill. That's not going to happen. She started to protest, but I didn't let her. You wanted to be free, Sophie. Free from me, free from my supposed lack of ambition. So enjoy your freedom. I am not your safety net. I hung up before she could reply. The next encounter wasn't over the phone. It was in person. A week later, Sophie showed up at my office, unannounced. She looked disheveled, her once polished appearance replaced by something far more desperate. Liam, she said, pushing past my assistant and into my office. We need to talk. I leaned back in my chair and folded my arms. You have 2 minutes. Make it count. She launched into a long-winded speech about how hard things had been for her and Ethan, how unfair the world was, and how she was just asking for a small favor. Sophie, I interrupted. You made your decision. You left me for Ethan, thinking you were upgrading your life. How's that working out for you? Her face flushed, a mixture of anger and embarrassment warring in her expression. Liam, I know I hurt you, but you don't have to be so cruel. I thought you were a better person than this. A better person? I laughed. You thought I was a failure, Sophie. You thought I wasn't enough. And now you come crawling back for help, because your perfect life isn't so perfect after all? I don't owe you anything, Just then, as if the universe wanted to underscore the point, Ethan walked in. He must have followed her. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. He looked even worse than Sophie, unkempt, stressed, and clearly out of his depth. "Liam," he said, trying for casual, but his voice wavered. "Can we talk, man to man?" I stood up and walked around my desk to face him. "Man to man?" I repeated. "You mean the way you talked to me while you were sleeping with my wife behind my back?" "No thanks, Ethan." He flinched but pushed on. "Look, we made mistakes, but Sophie and I are in a tough spot. I was hoping maybe you could help us out, just a small loan." I laughed again, shaking my head. "Unbelievable. You betray me, you lie to me, and now you want me to bail you out. I'll give you one thing, Ethan. You've got nerve." Ethan's face turned red, his hands balling into fists at his sides. "You don't have to be such a bastard about it, Liam." I stepped closer, my voice low but firm. "I don't owe you anything, Ethan. You did this to yourselves. Now live with it." "Please, Liam," Sophie chimed in, her voice pleading. "We're desperate." I turned to her, my voice calm but cold. "Desperation doesn't erase betrayal, Sophie. You both made your choices, and now you're living with them. This conversation is over." Without another word, I walked to the door, held it open, and gestured for them to leave. They stood there for a moment, stunned, before shuffling out, heads bowed. As the door closed behind them, I felt a sense of finality. They thought they could manipulate me, guilt me into helping them, but I wasn't the man they used to know. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about standing tall, knowing my worth, and refusing to let the people who betrayed me drag me down. And as I sat back down at my desk, I couldn't help but smile. They thought they had broken me. Instead, they had set me free. The beauty of betrayal is that it has a tendency to turn on itself. Ethan and Sophie thought they could stick together and ride out the chaos they had created, but the cracks in their relationship started to widen into irreparable fractures. It was almost poetic, watching them crumble under the weight of their own decisions. The first sign came from our ever-informed mutual acquaintance, Chloe. She called me one afternoon, her voice practically dripping with gossip. "Liam, you are not going to believe this," she began. "What is it now, Chloe?" I replied, already amused by her dramatic tone. "Ethan is, how shall I put this, seeing someone else." I laughed, a genuine, hearty laugh I hadn't experienced in a long time. "Seeing someone else? You're joking." "Completely serious," she said. "Apparently, Sophie caught him texting another woman, some younger girl from his new job. Can you believe it?" I shook my head, the irony so thick you could taste it. Ethan, the man who had betrayed me with Sophie, was now betraying her in the exact same way. Karma hadn't just caught up with them, it had run them over. The fallout was swift. Sophie, who had always been so arrogant and self-assured, was now the one who had been wronged. From what I heard, she confronted Ethan in a spectacular public fashion, screaming at him in the middle of a cafe. "He tried to play it cool," Chloe went on, savoring every detail. "Said it was nothing, but Sophie completely lost it. She threw her coffee at him. I could almost picture the scene. Sophie, who had once boasted about leaving me for a better man, now reduced to hurling lattes in public. It was almost too good to be true, but it didn't stop there. The woman Ethan had been texting wasn't just a random fling. She was someone he'd met at his new job, and she was everything Sophie wasn't. Young, carefree, and completely uninterested in settling down. Ethan, being the impulsive fool he was, had convinced himself she was worth risking everything for. Sophie, of course, didn't take the betrayal lying down. She demanded answers. Demanded that Ethan fix the mess he had made. But Ethan, being Ethan, fixing things, was never his strong suit. Instead, he turned the tables, blaming Sophie for their financial troubles and accusing her of being too demanding. Their arguments became the talk of the town. Neighbors reported shouting matches late into the night, and more than one friend told me about awkward encounters where Sophie had burst into tears mid-conversation. At some point, Ethan just left, leaving Sophie in their shabby flat with no way to pay the rent. It was during this time that she called me again. Her voice was trembling with a mixture of rage and despair. "Liam," she began without any pleasantries, "you were right. About Ethan. He's a liar and a cheat, and I can't believe I ever trusted him." I leaned back in my chair and let her rant. I could have offered her sympathy, could have offered words of comfort. But where was the fun in that? "Sophie," I said, after she had paused for breath, "you made your bed. You chose Ethan over me because you thought he was the better man. How's that working out for you now?" There was a moment of silence, and I could hear her breathing heavily on the other end of the line. Finally, she muttered, "I don't need a lecture from you, Liam. I need your help." "No," I replied firmly. "What you need is to learn to live with the consequences of your decisions." Then she hung up on me. From what I heard later, Ethan never came back. He moved in with his new girlfriend, who eventually realized he was just as unreliable as Sophie had found him to be. The last I heard, he was bouncing between friends' houses, unable to hold down a job or a relationship. Sophie, on the other hand, was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. She had no job, no savings, and no one left to turn to. Her family, tired of her constant drama, had distanced themselves, and even her friends had started to drift away. The very life she had fought so hard to create with Ethan had been reduced to ashes, and I hadn't had to lift a finger. Karma had done all the work for me. There's a certain satisfaction in knowing that people like Sophie and Ethan are destined to self-destruct. They think they're clever, that they can get away with manipulation and betrayal, but life has a way of humbling them. And while they were busy tearing each other apart, I was thriving. My work was flourishing, my life was peaceful, and my future was brighter than ever. They say the best revenge is living well. And by that measure, I had won. There's a funny thing that happens when you hit rock bottom, when you've been betrayed, humiliated, and cast aside. You discover just how resilient you are. For me, the divorce wasn't the end. It was a beginning. A fresh start disguised as a catastrophe. Sophie and Ethan had burned the bridge behind them, but I was already building a better one ahead. After the divorce, I made one promise to myself. I would not let their betrayal define me. I would rise above it, not just for revenge, but for my own peace of mind. And that's exactly what I did. The first step was investing in myself. I upgraded my flat to a stylish penthouse in the city center. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, and a view that served as a daily reminder of how far I'd come. It wasn't just a place to live. It was a statement, a symbol of my new life. My career, which had already been solid, began to flourish in ways I never could have imagined. Free from the stress of Sophie's constant criticism and Ethan's backstabbing, I threw myself into my work with a renewed focus. Clients noticed, and new contracts poured in. My annual income sailed past £400,000 and kept climbing. And then there were the unexpected opportunities. My expertise and reputation in my field led to speaking engagements, partnerships, and investment offers. Every success felt like a quiet victory, a reminder that I was more than the man Sophie had underestimated. Socially, I started to rebuild too. Old friends I had lost touch with over the years reconnected, and new friends came into my life. People who appreciated me for who I was, not what I had. I attended events, networked with like-minded individuals, and even took the occasional weekend trip just for the fun of it. But the most significant change was internal. I learned to value myself in a way I never had before. For years, I had put so much energy into making Sophie happy, into meeting her impossible standards, that I had lost sight of my own worth. Now, I was reclaiming it. Therapy helped. I won't pretend I did all of this on my own. Talking to someone impartial, someone who could help me process the betrayal and the residual anger, was invaluable. My therapist once said, "Liam, you are not responsible for other people's choices. You are only responsible for how you react to them." Those words became my mantra. Then there was my creative side. I'd always dabbled in writing and photography, but now I had the time and energy to take it seriously. I started a blog, part personal journal, part professional insight, and it quickly gained a following. People resonated with my story of rebuilding, of turning pain into progress. Every now and then, I'd hear whispers about Sophie and Ethan. Their continued downward spiral had become something of a cautionary tale among our old friends. The updates were always the same: more debt, more drama, and more regret. Liam, a mutual friend, once said to me over coffee, "I don't know how you're so calm about all this. If I were you, I'd be furious." I shrugged. "What's the point? They're living their karma. I don't need to add to it." And it was true. Seeing them struggle while I thrived wasn't just satisfying, it was liberating. I didn't have to chase revenge or stew in resentment. I was too busy living well. Still, there were moments of reflection. Late at night, looking out over the city lights from my penthouse, I would think about everything I had been through. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the anger. It hadn't been easy to get through, but I had. And in the process, I had discovered a version of myself I never knew existed. A version that was stronger, wiser, and more confident. Life didn't stop throwing challenges my way, of course. It never does. But I met each one with a clarity and resilience I never could have mustered before. Losing Sophie and Ethan had been painful, but in retrospect, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. They didn't just leave, they set me free. Now, every day felt like a step forward. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. And the best part was, I didn't need anyone's approval to prove it. I had built a life I was proud of, surrounded by people who valued me, and filled with opportunities that excited me. My world was brighter, bigger, and better than anything Sophie and Ethan could have ever imagined. And as far as I was concerned, the chapter with them was closed. This was my story now, and I was writing it exactly the way I wanted.